This is for the city attorney. Seeing as though that hyper-gentrification is real, and there's no more areas for African Americans in particular to socialize in the community, will you all consider a moratorium on specifically the north end corner of Oakland? Would you consider that a moratorium?
I don't speak for the city attorney's office. That is actually a policy question, and so I think that that's a question, best for the elected official, the city attorney H.E.L.P.E.R, because it is a policy decision to decide, and it's not decided in a vacuum. It would be decided with the impacted community. It would be decided with law enforcement. It would be decided with our elected officials to determine whether or not the injunction as a tool is still warranted or not. So the answer to your question is we have to talk to the city attorney, other elected officials, law enforcement, and the community to figure out if the request is appropriate.
Will you support it? If we start the conversation with the elected officials, will you all support this idea of a moratorium? Because
Again, you're asking me to speak for the elected official. I'm not in a position to speak for the elected official.
No, for you. Speak on behalf of that, because we're going down here.
the nature of that question, the reason why it came up is because if we drive through our community, there was a time where he was able to socialize in other locations besides the park. And now the park, that particular end of the park is the only place. And it's due in part to hyper-gentrification. There's nowhere else for African Americans to socialize. Am I correct? Okay. So we need to look into that. The other question I have for the captain is gang violence down here in Oakland?
No, she does now, and in this particular basic H.E.L.P.E.R, your violent crime is up 45%. Gang, overall, in our division, our gang crime is up from last year. We're also up in homicide from last year to this year. And we're also using the injunction. We have 3 in Pacific, Shorelines is 1, Venice 13, and Culver City, and we have been using that tool for all 3 gangs.
And what about the
Hold on.
To answer your question, yes, gang violence is up in Pacific Division.
Not Oakwood area. Oakwood area.
Our robberies and violent crimes are gang-related
Well, hold on. Here's why I'm asking. Because when the injunction was put here, there was murders. And that's what we believe constitute gang crime, is shootings and violence. So I'm asking that question to see whether or not gang-motivated, gang-related crime is up. Now, crime across the board can be up, but gang-motivated crime,
It's not.
based on what I know, is down tremendously compared to what was happening 15 years ago. The reason why I brought that up is because the gang-motivated crime is down. Why now, in terms of the injunction being enforced, and this goes back to the city attorney. If gang-motivated crime, not crime in general, but gang-motivated crime, bodies, shootings, murder, back and forth, retaliation, etc. If that type of crime is down, why now that the injunction is being enforced?
So Stan, if you allow me to answer the question,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
make sure part of, I think, what Stan said when we opened up this meeting is to ensure that everyone walks through with a better understanding. Right, that's how Melvin introduced it. So yes, we can say that we haven't had a homicide in Oakwood, and I applaud that. Okay, we've had 10 homicides in the command in totality, and oftentimes crime can spread from one end of a division to another. But respect to your question about gang crime, albeit what you perceive to be a gang crime, there are 12 categories that LAPD perceives to be a gang crime. And when you take those in totality, we're up 60% in gang-related crimes. So we can say that we're down in violent crime with respect to murders and who's been shot, but we are definitely and empirically up with respect to robberies and aggravated assault. And in committing some of those crimes, we are using firearms. We are this close to what you're referring to, a homicide or some other type of shooting.
So my other question, I have two more. This goes back to the city attorney more than likely. How is it determined that a former gang member is still active? How do you all determine that? If a former gang member is no longer involved in gang activity, how do you all determine in 2016, 2015 now that that individual is still an active member?
Well, I will take the question from the perspective of, for example, whether it be for service or for the removal petition process, we're looking at an individual. You know, we work with our law enforcement partners and figure out what, if any, law enforcement contacts has this individual had, and what type of contacts that they had with law enforcement. Was it involving gang-related conduct? Did they suffer any gang-related arrests, any gang-related convictions? Did they suffer any arrests or convictions? The types of crimes that gangs normally are involved with. Penal Code Section 18622 actually lists out a lot of criminal conduct that helps define what a gang is. And so we would look to all that information to see if a person is in fact an active member of a particular gang. So it's based on what law enforcement presents us, it's based on an individual and their criminal history, and that's what we look to. And we look to that for purposes of determining whether service is appropriate. We'll look at that to determine whether someone should remain subject for enforcement. And when we prove our criminal cases in court, one of the elements of the offenses that we prove many times is the active membership. So that's what we're looking to. So if we found an individual who is devoid of any of that information that I just described, then they wouldn't be an active member of that particular gang, and we wouldn't be prosecuting the individual. If we had an individual that again was devoid of that information, and I'm not the decision maker, but that would bode well, for example, for a removal petition. So those would be the things that we look towards in terms of determining whether someone is an active member of a gang. Something that's more than just name alone. Conduct and allegiance is what we're looking for when we try to make that determination.
And then my final question is for the captain. Now we know that there's homegrown informants that could very well be in this room right now. How do you determine if that information that you receive is adequate? And if it's not adequate, how do you determine if it's even the truth? And that's my final question.
Then you're going to have to clarify with respect to what type of information.
Again, there could be homegrown informants in this room. The nature of this question is coming from if the injunction have not changed, then how do you determine if an individual is active? The only way that that can possibly be determined is through intelligence. My question is, how do you determine that the intelligence that you're receiving is accurate?
We don't base determining if someone's an active gang member off a criminal informant. So when you're using the word CI, you're referring to a criminal informant, and that's a law enforcement strategy that's used as one component to determine if criminal activity is in fact taking place, and it still has to be vetted out and verified. To use a CI is nothing that we use with respect to verifying gang activity. That's done through daily contacts, that's done through arrests which are made by reasonable suspicion of probable cause. Those reports are vetted out through the review process. If there's an arrest, if there's a conviction, those activities are tallied up, for lack of a better word, and those activities and actions are used to determine if someone's still actively involved in the gang. So it's not based off what you're referring to, homegrown criminal informants. That's not how we determine gang activity.
Father Tommy, you want to say something?
I'm sitting here and I listen very carefully, and I was listening to you, to the city attorney, and that was a very extremely long process of how the dynamics of the injunction works. And in that process, I'm listening, and along with that listening, I see a lot of dollars. I see a lot of money. I see a lot of time. And I just don't see the city spending that amount of time to make sure that those tools that you call are used properly. I agree. I believe they're being used, but I don't believe that they're being used in the manner that you just described. I just don't see it. I don't believe you, for one, you said that the two individuals that were placed on the injunction, that we have, we've notified them at their last address. Well, a lot of the people in Venice haven't lived here in years. And so the last address in this community, I'm sure there's somebody else living there now. So that would say to me that most of the individuals from Venice were not informed of the changes that took place within the injunction. And let's just be real clear about it. Let's just get right down to the nuts and bolts. The dynamics of the community has changed tremendously. And as a result of the community changes, the captain here just spoke about phone calls and community calls. That's the reason that the injunctions are being enforced. That's the reason that the park is being targeted. It is because of the concerns of those individuals that are now living in the community. And probably not any of those individuals are here in the room today, because I'm sure you didn't call on yourselves. But that's just to get real clear with it. And I understand because if the calls come in, the captain has a job. And her job is to enforce the law. So the law says that I got a call for an individual's gang members that were hanging out at the other end of the park. So we'll deploy a unit to go check out the gang members. So that goes down as a statistic as individuals. So the number of calls, let's just call it what it is. But what we have to rectify is the validity of the calls. When we go out on the call, do we go or do we just go and we get the old dudes that's sitting down there playing dominoes and say, yeah, we got gang members down there? Or do we go and we look and see if the individuals are stopped or on the gang injunction and say, well, you're on the injunction, and or are we just doing this blanket thing where we've gotten a lot of calls about individuals that are at the other end of the park? And I for one, know that there are calls that come out that are hurtful. Let me just put it like this. I've been at the other end of the park after an individual was killed or in our community, or an individual had died in the community, and they've had repasses. And when I spoke with the officers in regard to why were you deployed to this, well, the exact call was, well, we were informed that there were 400 gang members that were going to be here. And so I sat for 8 hours. 8 hours I sat at the other end of the park. And I watched officers sit at the gates, the entrance gates to the park. And I watched them come in, and I watched them harass individuals in the park for smoking a cigarette. And I actually watched them escort individuals out of the park. And I videoed it. And that smoking at the other end of the park is complete harassment. That is complete harassment. And individuals in the community should have the opportunity to be able to congregate in a peaceful manner like any other individual living in this community. They shouldn't be targeted simply because they're different, or they appear to be different, or your perception of them is who you think they are. And it's just not fair to the individuals that are down there. And I know for a fact that's taking place. I've spoken with officers on several occasions, who's been very, very gracious who's been very good at helping us address those issues. With officers who were, I don't want to call them renegades, but officers who were real cool about the way they address things at the other end of the park. Thank you.
So we got one final question, comment from Josh, and we can open it up for the audience.
So I just wanted to put some substance in, because both Arturo and the captain mentioned the process that they go through in terms of balancing who is an active gang member. But there are some actual guidelines that are both used in the policies of how people are added to gang file, which is the Cal Gang database, which is the statewide database. But also, and in my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but LAPD trains on using those similar or same elements. So, and I believe the standard is if you need to, theoretically, you could add somebody to the gang database and or identify them as a gang member or associate. Is that correct? So I just want to read those out because it's important. This is an opportunity for education for the community because I don't think.
We need copies of what
we can, yes, I can get you copies of this. So, so I just want to read those out because these are things that are not often shared openly with the community. So one is subject to being a gang member. So everybody knows what that looks like. And it's a stop, it's an FI card, someone says, where are you from? Subject has been arrested with a known gang member for offenses consistent with gang activity. Subject has been identified as a gang member by a reliable informant or source. Subject has been identified as a gang member by an untested informant. Subject has been seen affiliating with documented gang members. Subject has been seen displaying gang symbols and or hand signs. Subject has been seen frequenting gang areas. Subject has been seen wearing gang dress. Subject is known to have gang tattoos. And then in custody classification, so which is a separate thing than something that happens in the community, right? So, and I'm not saying this is not information that's intended to inflame, but to educate. These are the standards that are used, and it can, especially in communities that have a history of gang involvement and gang presence, these are things that can end up being vague and broad to people who live in the community, right? Like if you have a neighborhood that is seen through the lens of law enforcement as a gang neighborhood, and you grew up next door to somebody who is an active gang member, there can be a slippery slope there of whether or not you are a gang member because you're in that neighborhood with that person. That's something that folks just need to be aware of. Those are the standards. Now, when Arturo says he reviews, what he is doing when he reviews it, he shared this with me, is attempting to actually ascertain whether or not that initial identification, whether or not that evidence actually demonstrates gang membership. But these are the standards, these are the elements that are used. I just wanted to put that out there. We can't get copies for folks if we don't have them already.
So Joshua, in my 20 years, when you enter, I used to work in gaming, you enter in Cal Gangs, I have not seen someone check criminal informant as a means to use those two criteria. So if just to mislead, I don't want to mislead anybody, but when you enter into that database, it's typically based off admission, gang tattoos, and things of that nature, or the actual physical arrest. And those are the primary reasons in which they would be eligible to enter into that database. So I personally, in 20 years, have never checked that or seen a CI be the sole indicator or part of the criteria to them enter.
And that's responsive to, I think, what Stan was asking earlier, just to be clear about that. I also think, though, it is important, just from a community perspective, at least what I've learned from my clients, is that gang attire, gang tattoos can also be a separate form of self-identification with the community that you grew up in, the community that you feel part of, separate and distinct from criminal gang activity. And I think it's important to recognize that those things, there's not such a clear line drawn between those things for a lot of folks impacting the community.
Thank you. So, yeah, we can definitely get copies to folks. Also, there is a document on the city attorney's website that's the guidelines for injunctions, and if you're able to access that, it does include the list of these criteria in it, but we can get copies to folks as well. One little thing that I just wanted to add for clarity was making sure that we're cognizant of the difference between being served with the gang injunction and being arrested for violating the gang injunction. Because the question was, if there's a person who maybe used to be a participant in a gang, 15, 20 years ago, but it's been a couple of decades, maybe they're not anymore, how do you tell if they're still in the gang? And the process that was described of deciding if somebody's on, is worthy of being served with a gang injunction if they fit the criteria, it's important to know that that's only triggered when the city's looking to put a person on an injunction now, or if the person is already on an injunction and petitions for removal. So if you've been served with a gang injunction already, like 10 years ago, they're not going to, before they arrest you necessarily for violating it, they don't go back and like check the list every so often. Correct me if I'm wrong, or correct me if I'm wrong, but there isn't a process where unless you petition for removal, they go back and look through to see if you still fit the criteria now. Once you're on the injunction, that's done. They've already decided that you fit the criteria. And so even if 10 years pass, even 15 years pass, unless you submit a petition to be removed from the injunction, they don't look at that criteria again in deciding whether they can enforce it against you. But if I'm wrong about that, please.
With regards to enforcement, when we train the L.A.P.E. officers, we first and foremost, talk about the law, the elements of the offense, and what we need to prove. Because it is pointless, and we as prosecutors just don't prosecute cases for the sake of prosecuting them. We have to have a reasonable belief that we can prove the offense that's being brought before us. And so because it's very important that we have those elements of the offense, what we do is we do train LAPD in terms of what it is we need to prove. So if we were presented with a case, and it is true that the person is served with an injunction, they are subject to that injunction, and currently the removal petition process is the way to get off the injunction. However, if we're presented with a case of an individual who is subject to an injunction who gets arrested, but we can't meet the elements of our offense, we're not going to prosecute it. So we've diligently worked with LAPD for them to understand, and we've trained on it in terms of, if you're going to use this tool, and for it to be effective and for us to actually take a case to court, this is what we're looking for. And through that process, we're working with LAPD so that they're much more discerning when they come across a set of facts and circumstances when they go to use the injunction tool. And so albeit a certain individual is subject to enforcement, that officer, when they go to do enforcement, has to know that it's not simply that injunction arrest. I have other elements of the offense that need to be proved, and my team is trained on what those elements are, and we're going to need that evidence, because otherwise we're not going to get any traction or mileage on that arrest, because we won't be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the crime was committed, and we're required to prove our cases to that standard to a jury of 12 individuals. And so, as prosecutors, we only process the cases that we reasonably believe we can prove. And I know this is going to, be hard to believe, but there are many cases that we do not prosecute. There are many cases that we quote-unquote reject and send back to law enforcement, saying that although you have reasonable suspicion and probable cause for the arrest, there just isn't enough here to present a prosecution because our standard of proof is much higher. And so through that process, again, and through the training process, it should certainly address some of the concerns that Catherine mentioned in her statement.
So at this time, we're going to open up to the audience. Keep your comments minimal, because we're on time schedule here in this space. We want to thank the panel for all the information that they have shared. Again, keep the comments. It would be great to have some questions direct, but the comments, you got them, you got them. But let's not have a 1 hour church over here. All right, ain't nobody really has to try to do. No, it's not. This is informational. Okay, so come on up, brother.
Good evening, everybody, and everybody in the audience. My name is Raphael Anderson, or Spud, because I know that's something you don't know my real name. This is for the captain. Captain, I'm here to represent my family, and they are really concerned about selective enforcement. Now, we talk about a nuisance. We as a community have our own nuisances, like the people running the stop signs. And we have elders and children. You don't say anything about that, but they continually do it. I have documentation, the police are sitting there and watch them run the stop sign, but they don't say anything. I watched a guy in a Ferrari go from Gold's Gym and ran every stop sign going down Sunset until he got to 7. We see everything, and we just feel like that it's selective enforcement. Now, you say the calls. Where do these calls come from, Christ? Please, come on, and get off me. Where do the calls come from? Where do they come from? Because I don't think that they come from an informant. I believe that they come from the people that run their dog in the park without a leash, and it's not a dog park, but you don't say anything about that. It's selective enforcement because I'm a Cowboy fan, you know, I'm a Dodger fan, but if I wear blue, you think that I'm a Shoreline Crip instead of a Dodger fan or a Cowboy fan. And I just think it's selective. No, I know it's selective enforcement. So are you training your officers not to really pay attention to because you look like a security force, not LAPD, and you are protecting the new money down here. That is what it looks like. Training them because in the atmosphere of the country, because Venice is a part of the United States of America, and we're suffering from everything that the rest of the nation is suffering from. I already did, Stan, man. Stan, I'll talk to you. So, are you doing that? And I have a comment. And so, are you doing that? And I want to know, are you training them? Because it just looks like if we call, you pay no attention to it. If they call, you pay attention.
But to answer his question, am I training my officers to do selective enforcement? Absolutely not. And I hope that that is personal and one isolated comment. When we receive a 911 call, it's exactly that. It comes from 911. We don't know the race of the caller. We know that we've been generated into a neighborhood to answer a particular problem. Okay? If you guys are seeing problems and you believe someone's running a stop sign, that's why I have my car. That's why you have a senior lead officer. Those problems are equally important to us. We need to know about them to work on fixing them. They are important. I don't want to see a child run over because someone's irresponsible running a stop sign. So, and I'll get you when you get there, but I appreciate his remarks, and I can't change his perception. All I can do is you can make us mindful of other issues in the neighborhood. I can assure you that we'll address them collectively as a division, whether it's through our senior lead, whether it's through our traffic enforcement unit, or whether it's I'm personally being out here. Thank you.
So I do have a timer on me, so I will be.
Thank you.
I'm Antoinette Reynolds, and I'm one of the community activists here in Venice. I run a nonprofit. I just wanted to come tonight and bring some of the Youth Justice Coalition petitions. I called, they said they're valid. Maybe you guys can let me know if the people here that want to get off a gang injunction, are these usable? Because I don't know if you guys brought any.
So I brought the city attorney's petition, but as Arturo said, you can literally write, write a letter. But can I just say, my card is available as well to work with any individual in this room or any individual you all know who wants to file a petition. So,
okay. So there are 19 here, 18, and when I called the coalition, they said be hopeful because out of 100 clients, only 2 got off a gang injunction. It's a long process, and you know it's bureaucratic. It's going to take time. You got to be patient. If anybody is wanting to fill this out and need assistance, I'm at the First Baptist Church of Venice. I am a mental health clinician. I'm not acting as a therapist, but I am a great case manager. And you have to be diligent when you deal with this type of institution, and you have to be positive, and you have to press and don't give up. Do all the things you need to do, but you gotta be on them or it will not get done. So it's nice sometimes if you guys have an active person in the office, and I wanna thank you if that's what you're doing. But you will not get off a gang injunction if you don't press hard to get it done. The system is set up a lot of times for us to give up because it takes so long. So don't give up, press and keep it going. And then I wanted to address the captain. I'll be quick. When you guys look at your statistics, are you incorporating that now we have so much more drugs in Venice? Like there are a lot more drugs in Venice now than there were like 10 years ago. That a lot of the robberies and assaults are coming from our young youth that are homeless, that are unmet, that need to get drugs. Are you guys looking at that area? We have a lot of outside young Caucasian children on the beach that filter through Oakwood, stealing and doing things of that nature. Are you taking that into consideration when you're looking at your statistics?
Well, the statistics are just that, when I give you the crime numbers, we're not breaking them down by race profile. They're by
But it sounds like you're breaking them down based on the gang environment.
The numbers I originally gave, the 230 calls, that was specifically on Oakwood. The overall gang crime, that is respective of the 26 square miles that composes specific. But to answer specifically your question, we are doing a lot of things holistically with respect to homeless outreach, trying to get people in drug treatment centers. So our goal is not to put everyone in jail, and that's why we're here. We're making it perfectly available. Hang on, let me finish. I listened to everyone's dissension and their opinions, and I think it's fair if you listen to what I have to say. But we're here to tell you who's on the injunction. We're telling you how not to violate the injunction. We're giving you tools not to be arrested. It is a tool we don't want to have to default to. So we'll give you everyone's name who's on it, and we're giving you every action that would cause you to get arrested. So we're here being an open book. So to answer your question, it's not our goal. We'd rather see young men and women thrive.
Okay, so
That's our goal. We don't want to rush our way out of anything. It didn't work in the 80s, it didn't work in the 90s, and it's not going to work in the 2050s.
So real quick, I would like to see the police officers not only park at Oakwood and sit, they actually sit there. And they sit and they look and they wait like we need security. But I don't see a lot of them on First Friday. And to my community, real quick, no. Real quick, to my community, it is a lie that Oakwood is the only social place that we can go to. I'm a black woman and I'm gonna go wherever I want to go. And you guys need to start. Go to the coffee shop. You need to go to the library. You should walk your dogs more, and you should own your community. You pay taxes, you pay your mortgage, and you own here.
So I want to thank Ms. Reynolds for bringing up the removal petition. So the petitions that have been provided, those are generated by the Youth Justice Coalition. The important thing, and we have our petitions online, is if you look at the petition the City Attorney's Office has generated, that's the information we're looking for. So whether it be the Youth Justice Coalition, ours, or someone handwrites something out, the important thing is to give us that information that we're looking for and fill it out. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's very important, and I've had, I've worked with Josh over the years, and I've worked with other entities. When you fill out the petition, and I'm very happy to hear that Ms. Reynolds will help people fill out the petition, is it's very important for the individual to make sure it gets to us. Yes. The fact that an individual fills out a petition, ours, somebody else's, a piece of paper, and gives it to a third party, there is no guarantee that that person is going to get it to us. And so it's very important that the individual, after working, with somebody, that they themselves put it in the mail so that they know that it went in the mail. Just my filling out the petition, giving it to that person as being helpful and expecting them to mail it, I've not put my trust in someone else that they're going to actually mail it. That may or may not happen. So it's very important that the individual knows what's going on. The great thing about working with Josh is because Josh and I have been talking over the years, there is a follow-through and a follow-up system, and the phone calls can be made. Hey, we've literally had the conversation. Hey, I mailed something. I'm like, I haven't seen it. There's something missing. Let's figure out what it is. I just got it, you know, it came in the mail a week later, or hey, it's nowhere to be found, send me another copy so that we don't lose track of these petitions, because we actually do take it very seriously. So I said all this for the individuals who are interested in the process. You know, tell us you don't want to be on the injunction, look at our form, provide us the same or similar information, use somebody else's form, same or similar information, and if you're going to send it to us, make sure it gets sent to us. Don't necessarily put your trust in a third party, because you don't know if they will or won't mail it. Separate and apart, because this did come up, to date, 29 people have been removed from enforcement since we started the removal petition process in Los Angeles. So 29 people have been removed. These are 29 individuals who have applied and successfully removed.
And how long did it take?
Well, it's, you know, as Josh mentioned, it is very labor intensive. And unfortunately, it could take, you know, as much as a year to get through the process. Well, we started, the question came up, and it's a valid question that Tommy asked, which is how many people. So we actually started this process back in 2007. We've received various numbers of petitions over the years, some more, some less. Of the 134 petitions that we've received, we have 24 that are currently going through the process. We have one that withdrew their petition. We have 29 that were successful. We have 49 that weren't successful, but were explained what the deficiencies were and what they needed to do to become successful. We actually had 26 who believed they were subject to enforcement and they weren't, and they were notified of that fact. And we had 5 that actually came from other jurisdictions, and we connected those individuals to those jurisdictions. And so while it's a lengthy process, while it is a process, and while I agree with Ms. Reynolds that it's important to stay on top of the process, I don't disagree with that. There, at least today, is a process where there was none many years ago. And so we invite people to petition and to contact our office.